This is Distant Replay.
Our documentary this week, Winning Time, Reggie Miller versus the New York Knicks. This was an ESPN 30 for 30 film directed by Dan Flores. This debuted in March 14th, 2010. This is also part of the first volume of films, so this was only a few episodes after the Without Bias, which we went back and did not too long ago on the podcast as well. But this is one of the early ones, and it's a great story because we decided to go this route because the Knicks are relevant again, Mike. Congratulations. The Knicks are back in the playoffs.
Thank you. And we're recording this right before game one of the first round playoff series with the Hawks. So needless to say, there's going to be 15,000 people at the Garden, and I am pumped up.
Yeah, but it's not going to feel anything like it did back in the 90s in the Garden, which was an epic time. You know, we kind of documented a little bit with our game going back to the Rangers and how loud it got for their win in the Eastern Conference Finals of that. But now we're talking basketball, and I love this story because this kind of hits, I know this hits really close to home for you, but even for me as a big basketball fan growing up, even living in Alabama, I watched NBA a lot more then than I do now. And I specifically remember, obviously, the Jordan years clearly, but the Knicks and Reggie Miller, like that rivalry is still one of the rivalries that's in the back of my mind. Even through all the NBA that I remember in the 90s, that rivalry is still one that's very prevalent to me, and we get a pretty good coverage of that in this documentary.
If you ask anyone who's a Knicks fan, okay, the Knicks had three what you would consider rivals in the 90s. You had the Bulls, the Pacers, followed by the Heat, okay? I think if you ask any Knicks fan, their ultimate rival in that decade was the Pacers because they played the Pacers in a time period where they had a legitimate chance to win the championship. And the Pacers were kind of that pest that was always in their way. You know, They played each other in the playoffs 3 years in a row here, you know, all very good series. So, you know, you can't understate just the animosity towards the Pacers and especially towards Reggie Miller that Knicks fans had during that time period.
So we'll take you back to that documentary today, and I actually learned quite a bit in this documentary. I didn't expect to learn a lot. I expect to be entertained by going back and reliving this. There's a few things I learned about this rivalry beyond what happened on the court that I thought was very interesting. A little bit of backstory to it. So we'll do that today on the podcast. You can always find us online at distantreplaypodcast.com, Twitter, Instagram, and of course YouTube as well. Please like us, subscribe, follow, whatever it is, leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you. Anything you thought you have on this documentary or anything else we've talked about on the show. We go back and watch all kinds of old sports and talk about them again years later. So tonight it is the documentary recap on Winning Time. So this thing starts off kind of taking us into that series in the mid-90s and the rivalry. But it all, like at the crux of it, the core of it, is Reggie Miller and John Starks. And I think I remembered, but I'm sure you probably have a much better memory of this. But, I mean, those two guys, was that the main part of the rivalry to you, Mike? Or was it a bigger, more team versus team? Or did you look at it specifically player versus player?
I looked at it team versus team. Okay. I looked at two teams that were very, very similarly built. And that's why the games were always so good. You know, same kind of mentality, especially from a defensive standpoint. Starks wasn't good enough to really be like, oh, wow, it's John Starks versus Reggie Miller. I love John Starks, but he just wasn't that level of a player. Where you like Starks was he didn't back down from the good shooting guards of the day. He never backed down from Reggie Miller. He never backed down from Michael Jordan. You know, he felt like he belonged with those guys. There was good and bad with John Starks, as this documentary gets into. But overall, I think it's because their sort of rivalry, if you will, started in that 93 series. It became a main storyline there for that season and then the next 2 years.
So I thought it was very interesting, though, like the Miller, I mean, you know how good of a trash talker, anybody that's followed Miller knows how good of a trash talker he was and how much he got into people's heads. But the fact that he broke John Starks down as much as he did to the point where Starks headbutted him on the court, and which was a huge moment. And I don't think you ever see a team react the way his teammates did. And I don't know if that it's as much the way like the game and the sports have evolved where maybe players don't hold each other accountable as much. You don't have guys that are as competitive, but the way Oakley and Ewing reacted to Starks headbutting and eventually getting ejected because of that, whether or not you felt like the headbutt was that serious or significant, doesn't matter. But the way they reacted to that was was remarkable because they got all up in him. And they knew, like, when that happened, that was a huge game changer.
Yeah, that was it. Was like older brothers telling a younger brother, like, look, man, you screwed up and don't screw up again.
Yeah.
But in a very Patrick Ewing and Charles Oakley kind of way. And Ewing and Oakley, to their credit, they held everyone accountable on those teams. And look up, if you don't know what me and Ben are talking about, look it up, the incident where Starks headbutted Reggie Miller in Game 3 of their 93 series, and you'll actually probably be able to find a YouTube clip of Ewing and Oakley's reaction. But it was hilarious.
It was hilarious. It was a big deal. But yeah, I think the funny part and the one thing I learned was, afterwards, Starks' mom talked to Ewing and was like, don't you ever get on my boy like that again. And he was like, listen, if he makes that same mistake again, I'm going to smack him. I love Ewing. I know you do, but listening to Ewing is great.
Ewing, for if you want to say, oh, he never won a championship or whatever, but those are people who didn't watch him play every night. Like he literally put it on the line every single night. And when you asked him a question or you asked his opinion, there was never any doubt that you were getting exactly what he thought. And you respect that as the years go on more and more, that kind of player, and especially just how hard he played. That's why he could yell at John Starks like that,
Right.
Because he commanded that respect.
It was his team, which is, eventually what we'll get to here before this thing's over with. But so you get kind of like that little taste of the rivalry and what it's all about and what was happening. But we go back and we learn a lot about kind of what brought us here. And there was a lot more connections between these two franchises than I thought there was, Mike. Like I just thought this was like a rivalry that popped up in the 90s. It was great while it lasted and then it was gone. But I didn't realize there was a few storylines leading into this. So the first thing, and I want your opinion on this, this documentary made it seem like the history of the sport in these two states. Well, I say New York, we'll say city versus state, but these two regions. We know the history of Indiana. It's a basketball state. Like, people grow up. We've seen Larry Bird shooting on a basket posted up to his barn, right? It's a religion in Indiana. New York, it's much the same, but very different the way it's played. It's played on the streets. I don't remember who made the comment, like, nobody's a good shooter in New York, but they can dribble and they can handle because it's cold, it's windy, like the conditions are awful, you're playing outside. But they acted like this was a traditionalists versus new age for basketball. I had no idea that was even a thing. Is that a documentary just building this up, or is that actually a storyline that existed?
Look, that may be how Indiana people feel. But I never once gave the state of Indiana basketball a second thought as it compared to New York. You know what I mean? Just never thought to make the comparison. Obviously, I know about Indiana basketball, and I know what they're known for. I know they're known for good shooters, smart players, the basketball hoop up on the barn. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think a lot of how we think of Indiana basketball is we think of the movie Hoosiers.
Yeah.
That's kind of how the rest of the country thinks about it. And I think that's kind of how they want to be portrayed, and just like basketball in its purest sense. And then New York, it was Larry Brown actually that was saying how, because Larry Brown, the coach of this Pacers team, but also from New York, how none of the guards in New York can shoot because they're always playing outside on rims with no nets and in bad weather. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you have to drive to the hoop more, things of that nature. You know what I mean? But yeah, from an Indiana versus New York standpoint, I never once thought oh wow, the brand of basketball we play here in New York is so much better, and man, they don't play it right in Indiana. You know what I mean? It might have been a thing for people from Indiana, though. I don't think I know one person from Indiana. So,
well, it's interesting you say that, because it almost makes you think it's like in a rivalry where that's not really a rivalry, but like the little brother of that rivalry thinks it is. They care so much about it.
Yeah.
But the other team that's really good is like, I didn't even know you cared that much. I didn't know this was a thing.
Exactly. You know what the best thing is, though? You could mark it down. If a documentary or a show is talking about how pure Indiana basketball is and how great, their history is, they're going to mention Damon Bailey. Damon Bailey was mentioned twice in this documentary for no reason. Damon Bailey and the fact that he played in the most attended high school basketball game ever.
Right.
That gets mentioned in conjunction with Indiana basketball virtually every time. And, of course, Damon Bailey went to the IU, and played for Bob Knight, the whole thing,
Yeah, that's funny. You're right. He did get a little cameo here. But the draft was the other part of this that I had no clue about. And you might, as a Knicks fan, had known about this a little bit more, just kind of the backstory. But going back to the 1985 draft, so a couple storylines in the draft. First one is Ewing. And I guess it was the first draft lottery they did was 85. Is that right?
Yep. Of course. Oh, yeah.
Which is crazy. So they did the draft lottery, right? We know how it is in the current form. It's a spectacle now. But back then, the Knicks were in the mix, and the Pacers were as well. And they ended up being the final two teams in the drawing. And at stake was Patrick Ewing. Everybody knew he was going to be the number 1 overall pick. Whoever wins is going to get Patrick Ewing. And it comes down to the Pacers and the Knicks, which is now, it's pretty crazy looking back on that now. I mean, at the time, probably nobody cared. But now, in retrospect, it's pretty remarkable that that's the way it played out. I cannot picture Patrick Ewing as a Pacer.
Yeah, you're not the only one, man. That's just total bizarre to even. I mean, after seeing like Patrick Ewing in like a Sonics uniform, it jarred me enough.
Yeah.
Never mind the Pacers, but yeah. So some things to remember here, Ben. That lottery, everyone had the same odds to win it. That's something worth noting. Yeah. So it wasn't like the worst record had the best odds, right? And look, Dave DeBusschere, who was the GM of the Knicks during the time. I don't know if you know who he was, Ben, but he's a basketball Hall of Famer. He was a member of those late 60s, early 70s Knicks that everyone loves.
Yeah.
So Dave DeBusschere there, with his reactions on every pick and his reaction after he knew he was going to get the number 1 pick is like iconic in Knicks history. That reaction.
Oh, is it?
That last reaction he gave when he sort of half stood up and like pumped his fist.
Well, yeah. Like when I watched it, that is the first time I've seen that clip. When I watched it, I was like, dude, this guy knows this is a huge deal, and he showed more emotion than I expected to see out of a GM. So that's funny. That's funny you said that, but I had no clue that was that's a clip that lives in like Knicks lore now.
Oh yeah, and look, and DeBusschere when he played was known for being like a hard-nosed player.
Yeah.
So like the reaction matches Dave DeBusschere. You know what I mean? So just yeah, look, that that lottery changed the course of the Knicks franchise. There's no doubt about it.
And then a couple years later was 87. The 87 draft with the Pacers. Now it doesn't have the Knicks tie-in, but this is the year that Steve Alford was coming out. Everybody knows Steve Alford. If you don't, big Indiana guy. I mean, he's like Mr. Indiana basically for a number of years, and successful with the Hoosiers, kind of like Indiana's son. And he's there ready to be drafted. The Pacers were drafting 11th overall, so pretty high. But everybody was like, man, this is perfect. Steve Alford's here on the board. He's a perfect fit. We need a guard. Like, we'd love to have him here. This is the story we've been waiting for. Well, the Pacers go ahead and take Reggie Miller, much to the demise of everybody in Indiana. And some of the reactions that we saw from the fans in this documentary were pretty priceless.
Yeah, they showed news footage of the day, like asking, like before the draft, asking people, who do you want the Pacers to draft? And they're like, oh, Steve Alford, he's such a nice boy. He's from Indiana, was great in high school, did well with the Hoosiers. We want him on the Pacers. Then they showed news clips from after they drafted Reggie Miller, and it were just like pure disdain for Donnie Walsh. So Donnie Walsh came as the GM for the Pacers in 1986, and this was like the first big decision he had to make, and he skips the hometown boy to draft Reggie Miller from UCLA. And at that point, Ben, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think most people knew Reggie Miller because of his sister, Cheryl Miller, probably at that point.
Yeah, and the documentary did a good job of this, of kind of explaining that for anybody that doesn't know, and kind of giving a little background on their like rivalry and competitiveness as a family. But the one story, and I didn't really realize this either. Again, I learned a number of things in this documentary. I know that's part of your criteria for a good documentary. But Reggie in high school had a really good game, scored 40 points. He's back home. I picture him around the dinner table or something, right? Talking about, how well things went. And he tells Cheryl, got to start, played a great game, we won. She's like, that's awesome, good job. I scored 40 points. It was a heck of a game. I mean, I lit it up. I was basically unstoppable. Yeah, that's great. And essentially just kind of like laying back, just kind of waiting until he was like, wait, so what happened with you? What did you do? And he was like, I thought she was going to say like 60. And again, I had no clue what was coming here. And she dropped, I scored 105. 105. I had no clue she broke a 100-point mark.
Yeah, so Cheryl Miller, I mean, look, I had heard that story before, but it's still awesome every time you hear it.
It's a great one.
And It is. And, she's considered, I don't know if still, but she was widely considered for a very long time to be like the best women's basketball player ever.
Yeah.
And I think personally, not only is she great in this broadcast, I think she's great overall on TV. She was a sideline reporter for TNT for a long time. I'm surprised, like maybe she doesn't want to be in the media anymore, or maybe she is, and I'm just not aware of where she is. But I thought she was great in this documentary. I think she's good overall. I thought she was great when she was describing how Reggie Miller is.
Yeah.
And how pretty much the way she looks at how her brother is how everyone else does. Like he's like a fly in the ointment. You know what I mean? He's just a nuisance. Like he was to John Starks, like he was to Michael Jordan. And I thought she was very candid in how she feels about Reggie. And I thought it was a very funny part of the documentary, them talking about their upbringing.
Let's transition into the actual series itself and the games themselves, because that's what this basically boils down to. So we got the setup, and you mentioned Jordan. So the first thing to note, the documentary talks about this, but Jordan retires, as we know, in 93. We've talked about it on the show. It's been talked about a long time. But he retires in 93. That essentially opens the door for both the Knicks and the Pacers. I think had he not left, Bulls are still the team. Like, it's still going through them. So this kind of became a thing because Jordan left. Otherwise, would it have been a rivalry at all, Mike?
No, it wouldn't have been. Look, this whole documentary can only be made. This whole rivalry is only a thing because Michael Jordan decided to go play baseball for 2 years. So we're talking about, what we're going to talk about here is primarily the rivalry in 94 and 95 with the Knicks and Pacers. So it was short-lived, but it was very heated, and they played three actually, in 93, 94, 95 in a row, three very good series. But make no mistake about it, this isn't even a storyline if Michael Jordan is in the league in all likelihood.
Yeah. In 93, it's not really covered here. The Knicks beat the Pacers 3-1 in that, ended up losing to the Bulls in the conference finals, as they did most playoff series in the 80s and 90s. But we get to 94, we have an Eastern Conference Finals, Pacers and Knicks, the chance to go on, a chance to go to the finals and actually, have a chance to compete for an NBA title outside of the Bulls. And the big story in this 94 series is Spike Lee and Reggie Miller. We get, I think anybody that remembers this and knows about this knows about Spike Lee. I think is this the time Spike Lee kind of came on the scene as a Knicks guy? Was there anything before? I mean, I know he's been around there before this, but was he as nationally known as a Knicks guy until this happened?
He was. He kind of came on the radar with the Bulls a little bit earlier in the decade.
Okay.
There's the iconic scene of Pippen dunking over Ewing, knocking Ewing down, and then walking over and telling Spike Lee to go sit down. So that's probably when Spike Lee ultimately got on everyone's radar. But, Ben, this bet that Spike Lee and Reggie Miller had on the series was breaking news to me, and I thought it was one of the funnier parts of the documentary.
Yeah, share that bet.
Okay, so Spike Lee, Reggie Miller, up to this point are cordial, and they have a bet on this series that if the Pacers win, okay, Spike Lee has to give Miller's wife a role in his next movie, right? Mm-hmm. Now, if the Knicks win, Reggie Miller has to go visit Mike Tyson, who at this point is in prison outside Indianapolis. I don't know what that has to do with anything. He didn't give any context to why he should go visit Mike Tyson or what, was Mike Tyson a big Reggie Miller fan? I don't know,
no clue
where this part of the bet came from, but that was the bet going into the series. And the Knicks win their 2 at home. The Pacers win their 2 at home. So back then the series was 2-2, 1-1-1. So for game 5, we're going back to Madison Square Garden. And the Knicks, this is one of these games, Ben, that I remember. So this is one of the one game in this, there's probably 2 games in this time period that I remember vividly. Probably 3 of them, actually. And this is one of them.
Okay.
So the Pacers are coming back from being down big early, right? Because now, as they start making their comeback, Reggie Miller is starting to get more and more on Spike Lee. He's starting to stare at Spike Lee. He's starting to taunt Spike Lee. Miller scores 25 points in the fourth quarter. At one point, gives Spike Lee the choke sign and grabs his crotch while he's doing it, which seemed like to be the only time Spike Lee kind of got mad at Reggie Miller because he was sitting right next to his wife when it happened.
Yep.
What I remember is Miller scoring 25, the Pacers going up 3-2, and you're sitting there as a Knicks fan, and you're like, we have freaking Jordan out of the league. This is our chance. And now we're going to lose to this dope Reggie Miller because at this point, he's just annoying, like Cheryl Miller put perfectly.
Yeah.
And all the anger of Knicks fans turned to Spike Lee. When I tell you, Ben, he brought up the newspaper clippings in this documentary that were written about him. All sports talk radio. I was about 13 or 14 at this time. All sports talk radio was people saying that they blamed Spike Lee for egging Reggie Miller on. That was a real storyline. That was not manufactured for this documentary.
Well, yeah. He took pride in the fact, in retrospect. I mean, if things would have played out differently, I'm sure he wouldn't have those headlines and those papers mounted on his wall and framed. But I didn't realize the choke turned into a crotch grab. I did not know that.
Because it wasn't on the you couldn't see it.
Like I don't think, which is crazy that they didn't get, like, the camera guy didn't pull out for that, which is pretty nuts. But like I had no clue that was the other part of it, because that's a pretty significant finish to that move. Like the choke move is already a pretty big deal, but to finish it the way he did, that's something to talk about.
And look, 25 points versus that Knicks defense of that era
in one quarter.
This Knicks defense, some games wouldn't let up 80 points in a game.
Yeah. That's
a big deal. I know we got to put it in perspective here with the era that we're playing in here. And remember, he's doing this on John Starks largely.
Yep.
So we have that storyline here in the background as well. So now we have the Knicks and Spike Lee. I give Spike Lee credit for this. Spike Lee now, with the Pacers up 3-2, makes the trip back to Market Square Arena. Remember that name, Ben?
Yeah.
Makes the trip back to Market Square Arena for Game 6. I give Spike credit for going to the game. And it's crazy how much the fans in Indy hated Spike Lee.
Dude, the clips they had of those fans, I mean, it was eye-opening now looking back on it.
It really was.
I mean, Spike talked about the fact that, the Klan was started in Indiana, and he showed up there. Like, he went to the game and, wanted to make a point of showing up. But and they only showed a couple of clips. Like, there was only 2 or 3. So I'm not, like, it's hard to take that and be like, okay, all Indiana fans are this way. Because, look, I'm from Alabama. Like, I can appreciate the fact that, like, not every Alabama fan's a racist. But watching the clips in this, when they, turned the pennants, those old school pennants, which I'm surprised anybody actually had those at a game, which was, number one, mind-blowing to see to begin with. But they turned them upright like it was like a KKK hat. That was nuts. And then the fact that somebody had a poster in the game with a noose around Spike Lee's neck. We think about 2021 in this day and age, like seeing that now. Whoa.
Yeah, that kind of took me back. I in the moment, you are not aware of that. You know what I mean? Like, they're not, but that was pretty crazy. And that's why I just said I give Spike a lot of credit for going to the game, because it was a pretty crazy environment. And getting back to the actual Game 6, that place is going crazy, first of all. And this is where, Knicks fans who love John Starks, kind of a love, not want to say love-hate, but up and down relationship with John Starks is, you remember games like this, where the Knicks are facing elimination, and Starks goes off for 26 points, right? The Knicks win, and now we're headed back to a Game 7 at Madison Square Garden. And although Reggie had a good game as well, he didn't shoot that great from the field. Starks was great in this game. I mean, just great. There's no other way to put it. And he would follow up in the finals with his 2-for-19 performance in Game 7. You know what I mean? So this season. So it was that kind of up and down with John Starks. And they portrayed this very well in the documentary. Spike Lee forever probably loves John Starks for this. I can't even imagine. Because Spike Lee mentions, like, if the Knicks would have lost this game, I wouldn't have been able to go back home.
Yeah. And it was almost Starks single-handedly winning that game. I mean, he's the one, he kind of rose and stepped up the kind of the way that Miller did in New York. And then Miller missed a free throw down the stretch when he went to the line with a chance down 1 to give his team the lead late in that game, and then misses the front end of that. They ended up still losing by like 7 that game, so it wasn't as close as it looked, but had a chance there late to put him up. Kind of felt like he was the GOAT at that point. I don't know if that was the true sense of how that game played out with the score the way it was, but he knew at that point, like, going back to the Garden for Game 7, it's not a good result for us. Like, we had a chance to close it out, we didn't. And on the flip side, Spike Lee, I can't believe he didn't put John Starks in a movie.
I know, right? And remember that we're talking Reggie Miller was almost a 90% free throw shooter for his career.
Yeah, never missed.
That's a big deal, him missing those free throws. Spike Lee gets bailed out by John Starks in a big way. Patrick Ewing only shot 10 shots in that game, by the way. I'm looking it up right now. So had the Knicks ever lost that game, forget about it. And now we're headed back to the Garden for Game 7. And like Ben just mentioned, which is important to note, is the Pacers right at this point, they don't know if they can win at Madison Square Garden because they've only won there like 2 times, period, in like the last 20 or 25 years preceding this game. So that becomes a big deal. And I kind of got the feeling that it was kind of like air being let out of a balloon. They didn't really have that much confidence going back to New York. But it was still a close game in Game 7.
Yeah, it was. 4-point game. And just look at the stat line as you said that. Ewing in that Game 7, 24 points, 22 rebounds, 7 assists, and 5 blocks.
There you go.
Dude, that is a stat line.
Yeah. And you have this going on the same time as the Rangers run to the finals as well.
Yep.
So just a great time in New York sports and a great sort of bounce back for Patrick Ewing.
Tough finals though, Mike. Losing the Rockets in 7 games.
Yeah, that's one where I hope we never do those games for this podcast because that's like truly the one time where I thought my team was gonna. Yeah, I truly thought one of my teams was gonna win a championship. Like it was right there, and they just didn't do it. That was a tough series. But back to this rivalry though, Ben. Now in this documentary, notice how quick I transitioned out of that one. All right, so now we're into the '95 season, right?
Yep.
And they think they need kind of a Reggie Miller feels like, hey, I need someone who hates the Knicks just as much as me on my team, right? Because we already got the inside, secure. We got the Davis boys. We got Rick Smits. We didn't mention the Davis boys and how almost exactly equal they were to Mason and Oakley. It was like incredible.
Yeah.
How the front lines of these two teams were like mirror images of each other. And I just don't understand why an NBA team this day and age doesn't try to zig when everyone else zags and plays defense like this. You could play within the rules and play like this. You know what I mean? I don't get why. If you watch the NBA right now, there's people going through the middle without a care in the world. And you can't tell me when you get planted like that when you come through the middle, it doesn't make you think twice like they mentioned in this documentary.
Yeah.
I don't get that. I don't get that. You know what I mean? But
you're not the only one. If you watch the 90s basketball, you probably ask a lot of the same questions. But this takes us to the following year. So we got another rematch. It wasn't Eastern Conference Finals this time. It did happen in the semifinals of the East this time through. But same situation. Very heated rivalry. Much of the same feelings and emotions. But now, as you mentioned, Mark Jackson's on this team. He wants to beat the Knicks as much as Reggie does, and he's great at kind of feeding Reggie that inspiration and motivation on the court to kind of keep him fired up at all times. And the one game that I mean, if anybody our age that watched the NBA, I mean, there's a lot of good memories, but there's definitely the comeback that Reggie had where he hit those 2 threes, scored 8 points in the final 16 seconds of that game to come back from down 6 in a game when everybody thought was over to win that game. That's a game that everyone remembers. I'm sorry, I know you probably do too, Mike, for different reasons, but one of the craziest finishes ever.
One of the craziest finishes ever, and we will tease something right now, Ben. I think it's appropriate that on Wednesday we will be doing an entire episode on this Game 1 of the 1995 Eastern Conference semifinals. So we'll be doing an entire episode on this game. I have a lot of thoughts on this game. The craziest part of that down the stretch was obviously Reggie Miller, 6 points, 8 points in 16 seconds or whatever it was. But some of the other plays in that 16-second span were even more mind-boggling, which we'll get to on Wednesday.
Yeah.
And that to me was the game that sort of proved to the Pacers, like, we can hang with these guys and we could beat them.
The funniest part to that to me in this documentary did a good job of getting a lot of people to get on the record and actually chime in on this. A lot of great people. But Anthony Mason, the fact that it cracked me up when he said that, when he described the play and said that Greg Anthony was open when he passed it, but then he slipped. And like you watched the replay and Greg Anthony's double teamed the whole time and was never open, slipped about 2 or 3 seconds before the pass happened. I'm sorry, buddy.
It was weird. It was weird because, so first of all, Anthony Mason, R.I.P. He's passed away. But you can't get me anything to say. You'll never get me to say anything outright bad about Anthony Mason. But what I will say is this: Mason was a very good passer. People don't think of that when they think of him, but for some reason he was just a terrible inbound passer. So I don't know why he was even inbounding the ball. They sort of hint at this at a point in the documentary. And yeah, he just threw the ball away to Reggie right into his hands.
from there we actually figure out what the title of the movie is all about, because I did not I was like, what is the name of this movie, like this documentary? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. Winning Time is like kind of generic, kind of like cheesy, kind of dumb. We get Ahmad Rashad, who has a pretty prominent role, as he was a pretty prominent guy in the NBA in the 90s for sure, talking about how Reggie basically there's a time to play and a time to win. And those guys that step up in the winning time and make those plays are guys that you expect them to make those plays. They're clutch. Like, we know who those guys are just across, every sport. And that's where Reggie was. So I was kind of wondering where that line came. I don't love the title, Mike, to be honest with you still. But at least it kind of makes a little sense.
Yeah, it does, yeah. And so, Ben, you had games. You had Game 6 at Market Square. You had Game 1 of this series. I told you about the three games I remember. And obviously now Game 7 of this series in 95, where Ewing misses a finger roll at the buzzer to lose.
Yeah.
And so just so you know, as a Knicks fan, Ben, we have Ewing. This is how you were thinking back then. And I'll tell you how it kind of comes full circle to today. You have Ewing not delivering in Game 7 against the Rockets. And then you have this situation where in 95, instead of dunking the ball, he tries to finger roll it for some reason, misses it, they lose. Now this is the height of, well, I don't think Ewing can ever win, so if he decides to leave, we don't care. That's how Knicks fans sort of turned on him a little bit.
Yeah.
It wasn't visceral. It wasn't everyone. But it was like, all right, I don't think we've given this guy a lot of chances. I don't know if he can get us to the promised land. Now, fast forward 25 years, I would kill to have a player like Patrick Ewing. Yeah. You know what I mean? He's the quintessential, like, once you lose him, you realize what you had.
Yeah, it was pretty remarkable. And you watch that play again, and he's got to have the ball in his hands, and he's the guy. But, I mean, he takes it from the top of the key, which is kind of crazy to give a guy that his size the ball at the top of the key to make a move. But he does. I don't think he could have dunked it, though, right? He left too far away from the basket. He didn't have a chance to dunk it.
Yeah, I more meant like, take another dribble and dunk it.
Right.
But I'm criticizing an NBA basketball player in the final seconds of a game.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I get it. But, in the moment, you're just like, come on. Like, again, another season without Michael Jordan. Knicks fans feel like, hey, we're the best team in the league now, and we're not even getting to the finals now.
It's crazy because when you watch that play and you stop it when he leaves to finger roll it, you're like, there's no way this guy can miss a shot.
Yeah. How can a guy 7 feet tall miss a finger roll?
No way. And you watch that play, it's pretty remarkable the way it finishes. Pretty crazy, man. And it sucks for the Knicks fans. And yeah, as you mentioned, it's been pretty bad over the course of the last 25 years since then. But Pacers would go on to win that, and just the way it finishes pretty wild. And your perspective helps kind of pull it all together. But 2 years, well, I guess we'll call it 3 years. 2 years for this documentary was what it featured on, focused on. But it was a great moment in time. But I don't know how many people are still talking about. I mean, do you still think about the Pacers, Mike, as a Knicks fan?
I don't. No, okay. There's no rivalry. Like, when I see the Pacers, I'm like, oh, I hate the Pacers. No, it left. Once all these players were gone, the rivalry was gone. But still, anytime I see Antonio Davis, he was on I think he was on ESPN for a while. I don't know if he still is. Anytime I hear the name Dale Davis, or obviously Reggie Miller, or even, Larry Brown.
Yeah.
Larry Brown and Donnie Walsh would eventually come to the Knicks as coach and GM.
Yeah.
And even then, I was like, oh, Donnie Walsh and Larry Brown, great,
By the way, the other part of this documentary was seeing all the old SportsCenter clips from the 90s. I missed that a lot.
Yeah, it was when SportsCenter was on, when you woke up from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. They showed the highlights over and over. You never got sick of seeing them because the anchors were so entertaining. Yeah, I mean, I think people ad nauseum have discussed how that was the heyday for SportsCenter. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like we're ever going to get that back.
Charlie Steiner, Dan Patrick, Olbermann, Chris Fowler even hosting SportsCenter. Great stuff.
Yeah, Jack Edwards.
All right, Mike, we've gone along long enough. Anything else from this documentary you want to hit?
No, just, hey, look, we didn't mention him, but Riley, is the one who brought this brand of basketball to New York in this era. He had a weird way he left. You knew with Riley it was not going to end well because he was just that kind of like, high-temper, alpha kind of personality, but would be remiss if I didn't mention Pat Riley and how great he was for the organization at this point.
Yeah.
That's about it, though, man. I think we hit everything, and this is a very good documentary if you haven't seen it.
I was going to say, how would you rate this doc?
I would probably say it's in the top quarter of these 30 for 30s.
Okay.
I don't think it's the best one. Like, I don't think it's as good as Without Bias. We did that. I don't think it's good as Once Brothers. I don't think it's good as some of the ones we've done recently, but still very good.
Yeah. No, yeah, I come with you. It's good in the fact that like it's good storytelling. I learned a little bit, but those moments, those two series, like compared to other things we talked about, seems kind of irrelevant and not a big deal. It was great to capture that moment in time, but when you compare it to like two Escobars and Without Bias, it's like how meaningful is that those two series, right? Like it doesn't.
Yeah, those had.
It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, those storylines you just mentioned with Escobar and Bias, those were like world and national news, like relevant stuff.
Exactly. Yeah.
Not about like Spike Lee. You know what I mean?
Yeah. All right. Let's close it on that note. If you hadn't, please subscribe to the podcast, follow us, and like, comment, all that stuff. We appreciate it as always, and we'll have more episodes coming soon. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a single one.
Absolutely. Like, subscribe, comment. We greatly appreciate it. And until next time.